This is lecture 15. We call it the end of the classical era. When you hear the word classical, think of Greece and Rome, at least in the West. That's what we're accustomed to. So we're talking about the 5th and 6th centuries. And you'll also see as the sort of classical cultures, Greece and Rome, as they decline, you're going to see the rise of Islam and the expansion of the Arab culture. So the end of the classical era is a great divide in human history. The Rome and the Han empires fall in similar time frames. Rome, of course, being on the western end of Eurasia, and Han, China, on the eastern end. The classical world is basically gone by 600 of the Common Era. Han, China, a couple of remarks here. A great deal of social unrest. There's economic problems. Trade is breaking down. Landlords too oppressive. This causes the peasantry to rise up. There's Hun invasions from Central Asia. Again, long-running theme in Eurasian history of the nomadic horsemen from the steppe lands of Central Asia encroaching upon the great sedentary civilizations in China, India, Persia, Mesopotamia. In Rome, a couple of remarks here. The empire had peaked by about 180 of the Common Era. Expansion ended shortly after that. There are fewer rewards for the army, fewer slaves for the economy. The army began to intervene more and more in political affairs. Cultural life deteriorated in Rome, with the exception perhaps of Christianity, which is growing. Of course, Rome faces barbarian invasions around its periphery in the east and in the north. And then, of course, Rome, sort of the semi-official date, 476 of the Common Era, the Roman Empire, at least the western portion of it, ends. The eastern portion, of course, of the Roman Empire will survive for another 1,000 years. It goes under the name of Byzantium, or the Byzantine Empire. And then, of course, in India, the Gupta Empire deteriorated in the 5th century of the Common Era. It became increasingly decentralized, which is a theme in Indian history, as local officials take over the functions of the state government, and also steppe invaders from the north encroaching upon Indian territory. Let's just mention a couple of these common factors in the decline of these civilizations. Invasion is obviously one. Steppe attacks or nomadic attacks from horsemen from the steppes of Central Asia, encroaching on China, on Europe, the Middle East, India. These horsemen, of course, have stirrups. This gives them a great deal of power because it allows them to continually fire arrows at the enemy from every direction. It frees up the horseman's hands because he can lock himself to the horse with a stirrup. And this creates probably the most formidable cavalrymen until we get to the modern age. Empires, again, we're talking about the Rome and China and India. Their military power declines as these steppe invasions increase. Another factor in decline, of course, is disease. Smallpox, measles. Of course, we will later have a tremendous outbreak of the bubonic plague in the 14th century. A third of the Roman population killed by disease. This creates economic chaos. It creates social chaos. Diseases spread from India with its tropical climate. From India, diseases spread along the human web that we've been talking about, this metaphor that the McNeils use. You can think of these cosmopolitan centers as they expand, connected by the trade routes, and of course the diseases follow these trade routes as well. Another factor, institutional weaknesses. The leadership seems to deteriorate. It's of less quality. The elites tend to be more short-sighted, more focused on their individual pleasure as opposed to the sustaining the empire. An appetite for pleasure and sensual indulgence. We've all heard about this the wild Roman orgies and et cetera, et cetera. I don't know if these are true or not, but there is a general sense across the classical world as it declines that the leadership is becoming increasingly decadent and less able, less willing to sustain the empires. Consequences in India, well, there's no subsequent empire in India until the 20th century. You see the British in India earlier than that, and then India becomes more modernized, more centralized in the 20th century. There's no powerful unifying factor in India over those centuries. India remains a productive economy. It produces cotton and pepper and other spices that are valued. Hinduism continues to evolve. The caste system remains in place, limiting your social mobility, whom you marry, your occupation or career. And local power in India prevails over any sort of centralized national power. Consequences in China, of course, China will recover. Former institutions will be revived. Confucianism is sustained. Centralized government will be revived. Consequences in Rome, well, the authority of the state dwindles. Trade begins to fail. The economy begins to fail. I heard one historian say that the Roman economy went from one of production to one of plunder. And of course, the use of slavery inhibits the Roman economy as well. I should emphasize again that local authorities tend to have more control now in the Western Roman Empire than any sort of centralized authority. These local authorities will in time emerge into what we call feudalism. Feudalism having about it a distinct hierarchy of classes with large landowners at the top, the landowners and their vassals and knights, and then beneath them, of course, the vast peasantry. And we'll talk more about feudalism as we go forward. And I said this earlier, but I repeat it. The eastern portion of the Roman Empire, centered around Greece and Turkey and the eastern Mediterranean, it survives for another 1,000 years. We'll draw a couple of conclusions here. As we see the end of the classical era, we see the diminishment of the importance of empire. Social deterioration pushed people to think of alternatives. There's a greater emphasis on religion, with both Christianity growing, and then you'll see the explosion of Islam in the 7th century. And finally, the unity of the Mediterranean world now divided among Europe to the north, Middle East to the east, and North Africa to the southern shores of the Mediterranean. So, just a brief survey of the end of the classical era. Thank you.